So is your argument then that the Jewish communities in these various countries, be they Iraq, Morocco, the remnants of the Ottoman Empire in Turkey and elsewhere, Syria, elsewhere, they had basically freedom of choice. They could say, okay, I'll stay. It's relatively safe for me. I don't see a problem for my future here in this country.
Even if it was not safe for them. Even if it was not safe to them, what's the connection? It was not safe for Christians to be in Iraq, let's say. How is it connected to the expulsion of the Palestinians? I mean, you have to be a Zionist to accept this. You have to be a Zionist to say that the Jews in Iraq belong to Palestine. But then you get into trouble. If the Jews in Iraq belong to Palestine, you as a Zionist movement want the Iraqi government to expel the Jews. In fact, you worked very hard to convince the Iraqi government to expel the Jews.
Yeah, but what you mean there, if I understand correctly, there were literal political programs, opaque and non-opaque, to encourage the Jewish communities in these areas.
But that's Zionism. There's nothing wrong with it from a Zionist point of view. We want the Jews. That's why Zionism and anti-Semitism is so much in common. Even Zionism and Nazism had something in common in the early 1930s. They have one common ideology: to get the Jews out from wherever they are and bring them to Palestine. Now, in the case of Iraq, the Mossad agents planted bombs in Iraqi synagogues in order to make sure that the Iraqi Jews would feel even more unsafe. They already felt because of the 48 war.
And that's a matter of settled history.
There's no argument. Again,
do you know any good sources for actually reading about
you
that,
can
that
read
sort of
Yuda
stuff?
Shenhav about it, and someone called Malka, his family name, I forgot his first name. They're very proud of it. They're very proud of it.
They being the Mossad?
The Mossad or agents who worked on it. It was not easy to, they will tell you, it was not easy to convince the Moroccan Jews to come to Israel. In fact, the elite went to France and Canada.
Yes, if I understand correctly, Morocco was quite a different situation.
But also Tunisia was a different situation. Also Algeria was a different situation. Syria and Lebanon were a different situation. Egypt was a different situation. Until 1956, Egyptian Jews did not want to leave Egypt. And when they had to make the choice that Nasser put to them, are you Zionists or Jews? And they could not answer that question. They got into trouble with Nasser. And there are Egyptian Jewish diasporas all over the world. In fact, there is an Egyptian Jewish diaspora in Israel. So it's a diaspora. It's not the same. There is no dialectical connection there. It's not an exchange of population. It's on one hand is the settler colonialist movement that ethnically cleansed the native population. On the other, you have immigration, sometimes because of ideology, sometimes because of economic issues, cultural issues. People immigrate. You know, one of the best way of showing how absurd this comparison is I can tell you every Palestinian in the world supports the right of Iraqi Jews to return to Iraq. Not one Iraqi Jew supports the rights of the Palestinians to return to Palestine. And that shows you that this is the end of the debate. There's nothing to talk about here. It's two different stories. And of course, people can ask for compensation from the Iraqi government. People should go back to Morocco if they want to. This is nothing. Palestinians want to go back to Palestine. In fact, the international community recognizes the right of return. Of course, the international community would recognize the rights of Iraqi Jews to go back to Iraq. I can assure you, the president of the Iraqi government would love the Iraqi Jews to come back. So we see that these are two discrete issues that have nothing in common apart from within the Israeli propaganda, of course. You wanted to find a moral argumentation for the expulsion of the Palestinians. I don't think anyone serious in the world is taking it. Anyone in the world takes it seriously. People know that the Palestinians are not coming back because of Israeli power, not because of problems with international law or because there was a deal with the Arab world. No, the only reason the right of return is not implemented is because Israel is powerful enough to prevent it.
Right, which is a strong, again, disanalogy to what others would argue, parallels population exchanges in other parts of the world in the wake of the crumbling British Empire. You're saying this is a clear distinction.
A clear distinction. If all the Palestinians went to a Palestine, and created the Palestine. And all the Jews went to Israel. And they were all, like in India, were all living there for hundreds of years. Then I would find the parallel. But who were the Jews in 1948 in Palestine? They were 1/3 of the population. The vast majority of them arrived 3 years earlier. 3 years earlier. How can you compare it to the Muslims and Hindus who lived for millennia in the subcontinent of India? The mosquitoes and helicopters both fly, but they're still not the same. They're still not the same.
Having discussed that, maybe we can move on to your understanding of the processes that occurred in 1947, 1948, and what actually led to the Palestinian refugee crisis, essentially.
Right.
Because the nitty-gritty, the details of the intentionality involved in different stages, and the programmatic nature or lack thereof, I think is really, that's my understanding, is where a lot of the historical contention in serious historiography lies today. So how would you articulate it to a lay public?
By the way, just a general remark, I don't agree with you. I think that the main debate used to be about facts. I think the debate now is about the moral interpretation of facts. But that's putting it aside. And I think what really makes the operation in 48 an ethnic cleansing, even without agreeing on the nitty-gritty, whether it was intentional, systematic or not, is the fact that Israel did not allow the Palestinians to return, which is an established fact. It's an official Israeli policy. And the fact
is it not they don't allow them to return unless it's within the confines of, or within the rubric of, a comprehensive peace negotiation?
It doesn't matter. According to the international law, the Palestinians in January 49 had the right to return. You could not condition it by peace. Nobody did. In fact, the United States imposed sanctions on Israel throughout 1949 for not allowing their Palestinian refugees to return. Unfortunately, American policy changed later. But anyway, let's go to what you call the nitty-gritty. I think the crucial moment is February 1947. When Britain decides to leave Palestine. As I said, there was already an ideology of ethnic cleansing, very much part of the Zionist ideology, but there was no capacity to implement it, and there was no historical opportunity to implement it. February 47 provided that opportunity. I don't think in February 47 they were clear on what they want to do with the Palestinian population. They first reacted to the new situation by trying to take over governmental, centers of power, create an infrastructure for the state. I don't think much was debated about the fate of the Palestinian population at that moment. They had more important fish to fry.
And just to be clear, so that moment was the United Nations?
No. It's before. It's February 47. Britain tells everyone that it's not going to stay in Palestine, and it transfers the issue to the United Nations. We don't know yet what the United Nations is going to decide.
Right, but Britain has now officially announced.
Yeah,
we're turning this over to the United Nations.
Very interesting. The Palestinian leadership doesn't do anything with this announcement. They think it doesn't matter. They are sure that the United Nations would do with Palestine what it did with Iraq.
What Palestinian leadership was there to speak of at the time?
Oh, there was an Arab Higher Committee. Most of its members were in exile, but they still met. And there were local national committees. There was strong connection between the Palestinian leadership and the Arab League. So they digested the news by saying that probably the United Nations would apply the same principle that applied in other mandatory situations, where the majority would decide what would be the nature of the state. The Zionist movement understood that if you allow the majority to decide the nature of the state, there will be no Jewish state. But as I'm saying, I don't think immediately they dealt with it. I think that only after the United Nations partition plan was adopted, in November 1947, and it was clear that the Arab world and the Palestinians are not going to accept it, and I think the documents also show it. I think that the crucial moment is the 29th of November of 1947, when the leadership of the Zionist movement understands it has an historical opportunity. because of the Arab rejection of the partition plan, and because the partition plan gives international legitimacy to the Jewish state, although they hate, as Ben-Gurion stated very clearly, even openly, not just in secret documents, he stated we can never have a viable Jewish state within what the United Nations accorded to us. And the reason was that according to the United Nations, the part that was accorded to the Jewish state had an equal number of Jews and Palestinians in it. And also
so something like 51 to
51 to 49.
Yeah.
And also he said the borders are not viable. But he said it doesn't matter because the Palestinians in the Arab world rejected it. What will determine, he says very clearly.
And we have explicit written documentation.
Oh, yeah. But as I said, this was not even secret documents. These are his speeches in front of Mapai, the major party, in which he says, we will need to have at least a population where we are 80% of the population, not 60-40, not 40-40, 80%, and we need 80% of the land if we want to have a viable state. He's very clear about it.
80% of the land being 80% of
mandatory Palestine.
Mandatory Palestine, excluding transitory.
Yeah, which is very interesting because the Zionist movement gave the United Nations, when they started their deliberations, they gave them a map. And in the map, they offered that the Jewish state would be 80% of Palestine, which is Israel today without the West Bank. Very interesting. The United Nations thought it was too much to give the 1/3 of the population, most of them immigrants who came a few years before, to give them 80% was a bit too, even they thought it was a bit too much, so they offered them more or less half of the country. But I think, let's say the 1st of December, and what I think the documents show, that two things they show. First of all, that there is a small group of people who decide to take upon themselves the decision-making process on the fate of the Palestinians. They're very secretive. They don't share their ideas with others. They meet quite often, led by David Ben-Gurion. They are called the Va'ada Me'atzet, the consultancy. It's an ad hoc group. It is not established Zionists were very organized. They had the elections and so on. This is not, nobody is elected and so on.
Nonetheless, these meetings are being documented.
They are being documented, although they're not minuted all the time because it was secret. I mean, that's the nature of secret meetings. Every now and then you can go and find, maybe there are. My friend Gadi El-Ghazi says, and I think he's right, we've only been shown 2% of the documents of 48. Only 2%.
Do we know that that's just in terms of actual volume, that's accurate?
Yeah, it's absolutely accurate. Only 2%. So I don't know, maybe there are minutes for all this meeting. I had to reconstruct them through Ben-Gurion's diary, through interviews with people, through, actions that had orders that I assumed were decided by the consultancy and so on. There is no organized file of the consultancy. But it's but there's enough material to see how the thinking develops. There is Palestinian rejection of the partition plan. There are even Palestinian actions against the partition plan. Attacks on Jewish transport, attacks on Jewish settlements, demonstrations, petition, although they peter out. There's a very interesting a remark by one of Ben-Gurion's advisors who says they peter out too quickly. We need them to show more resistance in a way. They're sort of worried about it. And why were they worried? And that's the second thing that happens. Suddenly they see something which will become part of the Israeli DNA. If you want to feel good with something bad you do to the Palestinians, you need a pretext. And the Palestinians at first provided the pretext. They attacked the Jewish settlement. They murdered a Jewish bypasser. So you can retaliate. And at first, the retaliation is not ethnic cleansing. It's tit for tat. But then two things happen. The Palestinian resistance peters out. There's not much to react against or retaliate. And secondly, you suddenly see that what is described as retaliation becomes more orientated towards chasing people out of their villages. But it takes a while, and I describe it in my book, The Ethnic Cleansing in Palestine. It takes a year for it to gel as a strategy.